Okay, so
Yeah,
this is part two with Rabbi Robert Rubin from Temple Beth Or here in Brick. He has agreed to do a follow-up interview to talk about um, his faith, his people, the Jewish people, the politics surrounding Israel, politics surrounding America, and some theology, all kinds of things. So we'll see how far we get for today. But Rabbi Rubin, thanks for joining us.
sure.
So we left off. You gave last time. You gave a history, a very thorough history of modern Israel, and all that's happened up until October 7th and Hamas attacking, and we covered a little bit of that. I wanted to start off by simply asking, what is it like for you and your congregation since October 7th? What has changed for you guys since then? Do any of them have family over there?
Well, on a personal level, you're right. In fact, our son and daughter-in-law are in Jerusalem for the year. It's part of rabbinical. She's in rabbinical school, and he works from home, so he's able to work from Israel from home. So they're in Jerusalem for the year, and a number of our congregants have family in Israel or close friends in Israel. Some grew up in Israel, and even though they're living here now. So it's very close, and also Israel is a small country. It's often compared to the size of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Population is about 10 million people, and so within Israel, there's a lot of sub communities. Some even called tribes. The society is divided into a lot of groups, but within each group, it's very tight. So a lot of people know a lot of people, even, or it's the you might know someone who knows someone who. So when it comes to the Hamas attack, for example, um, everyone will feel the attack, even if they weren't directly attacked themselves. They might know someone who was killed or captured, or know someone who knows someone, and it feels very immediate. So even the people here, feel that connection. And there's a general feeling of Jewish peoplehood all over the world
Yeah.
because there's only approximately maybe we think about 14 million Jews in the world total. So it's a small community compared to many world communities. And there's a feeling of extended family, like one big extended set of cousins all over the world.
Yeah.
So certainly in Israel as well. So people feel it personally and by extension, nationally from a Jewish peoplehood point of view. Certainly one of the surprise effects of October 7th was the explosive rise in vocalized anti-Semitism. Um, Obviously, there's people who are anti-Semitic to begin with, but even on October 8th, one day later, people were already protesting Israel
Yeah.
uh, and and blaming Israel and even claiming it never happened. It's all fake, and even as the obviously the counter offensive on Israel's part to defeat Hamas, with all the tragedy that's involved in this war, there's been a lot of protests against Israel, um, and we feel that as well. Hopefully, all Americans, all people would, but especially the Jewish community has been under attack uh, in perhaps greater vocal, outward, public ways. Certainly, the campus protests have been an example of that.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
as we said, I think in the first part of this, those calling for a ceasefire and a humanitarian aid somehow don't find themselves able to call for the release of hostages, which is also a very humanitarian thing to do. And so many Israeli are still captured in Gaza, alive and dead. Um, we think about 130, and so there are constant protests in Israel for the release of hostages, and um, and we feel that as well. So we feel the agony of being captured and missing, as well as uh, just the future of Jewish, non-Jewish relations in the United States and around the world.
Yeah, are there debates within your congregation about, I mean, like there is in the larger on a larger scale in America and certainly the international community. But is there disagreement within your congregation about what the Israeli government should or should not be doing? Like, is there?
Yeah, I think there's probably a difference of opinion. I don't think it becomes, open debate necessarily. I think we feel that we're here in America, and it's hard for us to make decisions for Israel. They have to make their own decisions. At the same time, there's always a range of opinions. I may mention it last time, the classic lines, three Jews, four opinions.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so there's lots of debate in general in the Jewish community, and that's okay. Respectful debate is okay.
So you wouldn't necessarily say that somebody is um, perpetuating anti-Semitism if they question or criticize the a particular initiative of the Israeli government. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. Many Israelis have various opinions what the government should be doing. So, it's just like in America, you can criticize what the American government's doing or policy-wise and still be pro-American.
Yeah,
And we would hope people are in support of Israel, even if they disagree with the current government or this particular policy or a different policy. But Israel itself is a robust democracy with a lot of different political parties. We could discuss that another time too. That's a whole.
right, right.
Our concern is with people who feel that Israel should not exist altogether,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that we feel is crosses over into anti-Semitism, or that the Jewish people should not exist, or that should.
yeah. I started to ask you this in the Dunkin' Donuts. Your time here in the United States, where have you experienced the most anti-Semitism? And I don't mean where, like geographically, but there has been anti-Semitism on the political right, and
Mm,
there has been anti-Semitism on the political left. Um,
right.
which side have you experienced more anti-Semitism from?
Well, personally, fortunately, I can't say I've experienced a lot of anti-Semitism. We know it's out there,
Mm.
and hopefully it won't manifest itself in future attacks. I don't know. I'm hesitant to say which is more. I mean, they're both
Gotcha.
problematic. Um, Certainly, uh, the political left that says Israel should not exist, that's troublesome. And the political right that says, you know, will not replace us, that's problematic too. And, so it depends whether it's a political anti-Semitism, racially motivated, uh, ethnic anti-Semitism. Um, it's unfortunate. Again, I mean, Jewish people, as I mentioned, about 14 million people in the world. So that's like out of 1,000 people, two are Jewish. So we're kind of small minority of the world,
You are.
and yet we get pretty much scapegoated often and blamed for everything. It's negative. So unfortunately, there are groups that are just anti-Semitic. They're against Jews being Jews. And
Yeah,
now there are many groups that are you might say, or anti-Semites, pro-Semitic, or
right.
supportive of the Jews. And and even the term Semitic is interesting because Arabs will say we're Semitic also, because it's from that part of the world, and some might claim we can't be anti-Semitic because we're Semitic also. But the
Hmm.
term anti-Semitism has generally been defined as anti-Jewish and as a
Right.
term. And if there's Islamophobia, that's not good either. And and anti-Arab prejudice is not good either. Um, you know, uh, I think I mentioned in the past. I should bring it, show you my T-shirt that says I bought says, love your neighbor as yourself. I really meant it. Signed God.
Hmm. You said 80% of is roughly 80% are Jewish. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then
Yeah, I think something 79, 80%, something approximately.
then 20% would be Arab and people from all over.
Right, right.
America,
And
France.
that includes Christians and Muslims.
Yeah.
There are Arab Christians, Arab Muslims. Um, So, Arab is more of an ethnic identity. Obviously, Christian, Muslim are more religious identity, and these
Right.
things overlap. There's Bedouins, there's Druze, there's a number of other groups as well. It's probably, I think, 20, 21% something.
What kind of response did, and you may not know the answer to this exactly, but if you know, what kind of response was there among that other 20% in Israel when after October 7th? Was there sympathy? Was there support from the 20%, the Christians and the Muslims and the Bedouins and the other minority groups?
Right. Well, again, they have a lot of diverse groups as well, but they're all Israeli citizens,
Hmm.
and many of them were killed and captured as well. We think about 130 some hostages in Gaza. They're Israeli hostages. Some are foreign nationals as well, by the way, and who were working in Israel at the time. But there were various. They're not all Jewish.
Yeah.
Not all the hostages are Jewish. They all had Israeli connections, either citizen or workers, um, but they're not all Jewish. So, I mean, the majority are Jewish, just like the majority of Israel's population is Jewish. But the um, it pulled together the Israeli community as well, which is diverse, but they're uh, and people were helping each other, across religious lines and ethnic lines. So and there still is a strong pull of being together and working together, obviously with political diversification, in politics,
Mm.
but at least as a country pulling together. And so they realize that they're, in the same boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's always there are always fringe groups, I suppose, but the mainstream, I think, is pretty much pulled together, especially in the light of the fact that before October 7th, Israel was very politically divided over some of the government policies, pro current government, anti current government, some of the changes they were trying to make, and they've often people have often said that once October 7th happened, once the Israeli tried to is now counteroffensive, um, people from all political streams are working together in the same military unit.
Israel itself is a very liberal, a classically liberal um, country. Many different groups live there.
Mhm.
And yet you were explaining that it's also in many ways very segregated.
Yes.
Correct? Can you explain that?
Sure. Israeli society, and you certainly feel it if you go there. And that's just the way most of them want it. I mean, it's okay. It is what we call a liberal democracy. People vote, they have citizenship, they have rights. Courts, Knesset is the parliament. I mean, there are different groups represented. There are many non-Jews in the Israeli parliament, Arabs as well, Jew, different people. But within Israeli society itself, there tends to be a willingness to kind of stick to your tribe,
Yeah.
and even within the Jewish people itself. So certain neighborhoods might be by design a Jewish religious neighborhood, or a Jewish secular neighborhood, or a Muslim neighborhood, or a Bedouin village, or a Druze village, or a Christian enclave. Certain cities, may have a higher population of one over the other. School systems, there are different school systems within Israel, um, all parallel streams, but there's an ultra-Orthodox school system, uh, kind of a nationalist modern Orthodox school system, an Israeli national, somewhat secular school system, an Arab school system. These are the political parties are also divided pretty much by religious or ethnic affiliation, as well as political right, left, center. And all these are overlapping identities. So, I don't want to stereotype anyone into one box, but it's just the nature of Israeli society. It's very kind of some almost like tribal and yet still a modern state. Um,
Yeah. And there's an extent to where in our big cities, it's like that in certain neighborhoods. But for Israel, you were telling me there's different court systems, like civil court
right,
systems for each.
right, as well. In certain matters, right, there's there's criminal courts, that's different. But for civil matters, this goes back to the Ottoman period, which we talked about last time. Turkey, Ottoman Empire ruled this area for about 400 years, up until World War One, when they lost, in the middle of World War One. Um, so the Ottoman system was that local communities could kind of govern themselves.
Yeah.
Just be loyal citizens, pay whatever taxes you need, don't rebel, and you can govern yourself. So that the Jewish community had its courts, the Muslim community, the Christian community, each had their own internal courts to handle civil matters, and also religious matters. So today, the British, well, in the 20th century, when the British came in, they kept up the same system, and Israel kept up the same system as well when it became an independent state. So for matters of marriage, divorce, personal status, religious things like burial, cemeteries. So there's systems within each of the religious streams, and it generally works. I mean, there's a sense of Israel, what's called the status quo, which I may mention last time, I don't remember, but status quo, like if it works, don't change it, don't break it.
Right. So
So
where would it like if two atheists want to get married, where would they go?
that's an interesting question. They would have some kind of perhaps ethnic identity, or that within, even if they're not religious, they might feel within. I mean, for example, within the Jewish community, which I can speak about a little better, even if they're not religious, they're still required to go to the Jewish marriage courts, which are
Right.
handled by the Orthodox. So it's a
Okay.
religious court handling, now, if they really don't feel comfortable doing that, they can go out of the country, get married civilly somewhere else, and come back and be recognized as a married couple, just like if a married couple came to Israel on their own.
Right.
They don't have to get remarried.
Right.
So that's a little diversity within the Israeli system, that the population registry would recognize them as married even if they didn't get married in Israel. Now
So
that's awkward for Israeli citizens to have to leave the country to get married and come back as
yeah, yeah.
a couple,
But
but
so if a Muslim wants to marry a Jew, neither civil court would perform the wedding, correct?
right, as far as I know, neither really right. The civil/religious courts of those communities would not do the wedding. They would leave the country, get married, and come back as a married couple.
And a lot of them go to Cyprus, you were saying.
Cyprus, it's close by. it's,
So they
so you
go to
kind of
Cyprus.
have like
Yeah. They
a
get married, then they come back and they're recognized. They're legally allowed to be married, and generally speaking, there's not much discrimination against that. But civil court, if it's operated by the Orthodox community, wouldn't do it, and the Muslim court wouldn't do it.
right, right.
And just to clarify, the different enclaves where Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, Muslims, Bedouins, Christians, they all live, in their different enclaves. That's not by law, right? I mean, that's they could
Right.
a Christian could live in the Muslim neighborhood if they wanted to, and a
Yeah.
Muslim go to a so I just
Right.
wanted to clarify that for anybody
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah. It's not by law. It's just by nature of Israeli society.
Culture and
I
yeah,
even I asked on one of our tours one time, what if I wanted to move into a Druze village? Uh, you know, I don't know, rent a house or anything. They
hmm.
said, I don't know, it just doesn't happen very much.
Hmm.
So, and the Jews are very much Israeli citizens. They serve in the army. So there are some mixed neighborhoods by design. Um, there's I think one called Neve Shalom, if I'm not mistaken, between Israel and between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, um, that is a mixed Jewish Arab community by design. There are some schools that are Arab Jewish by design. One's called Hand in Hand, that kind of bilingual schools that teach Arabic and Hebrew by design. So there are some efforts in changing this reality, um, but the fact that they're specialized schools and specialized towns tell you that it's not the rule
Yeah.
and not the majority. But you're right; it's not by law. It's just by design.
Yeah.
People kind of want to live within a community that's comfortable.
Right, right, right. Interesting. Now, can we talk a little bit about the expectations of the Messiah and its relationship to the state of Israel?
Well, okay, we could try.
We can try. Um,
Kind of
so
a long-standing question.
my understanding there is a diversity within the Jewish community, even within the Orthodox Jewish community, as to, and correct me where I'm wrong here, as to uh, the Messiah who is to come, setting up like whether or not the state of Israel should be established prior to the coming of the Messiah, or whether or not that
Right,
should be, we should wait until the Messiah comes to set
right.
up.
Yeah, that's a good encapsulation of a very old debate. Um, the Jewish notion of Messiah is kind of a political reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty, and hopefully the redemption of the world would come with that. Um, but so the question over throughout the centuries has been, for the coming of the Messiah would be that reestablishment. Just like we had with the first temple before it was destroyed, and the second temple before it was destroyed, some notion of Jewish sovereignty, uh, traditionally seen as coming from the line of King David, and sometimes called Messiah, son of David. The argument that came out in the open, I'm sorry, separate from that, there's always been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel, Jews living there,
Yeah.
even if some other empire was ruling it. So whether it's Christian, Muslim, or whatever who was ruling that part of the area for the last couple thousand years. So Jewish presence in the land of Israel, the obligation, if possible, to go to the land of Israel, to settle in the land of Israel has always been there. It wasn't so easy to do till modern times. You couldn't, if you were in Spain, you wanted to go to Israel, you had to literally walk, or if you're lucky to take a boat, maybe.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, transportation was not so easy. So, but people tried and people went and moved to Israel. So there was a notion of living in the land of Israel. But even if you didn't have political sovereignty, um, now again, like I said, under the Ottoman Empire, it wasn't Jewish political sovereignty, but at least it was an opportunity to run your own community, local community within the area of the Holy Land. When the Zionist movement, late 1800s and 1900s, kind of became more of a what's called political Zionist movement, as no, we want to reestablish a Jewish state in Israel, like like a third Commonwealth, so to speak. After the first temple and the second temple, now 2,000 years later, a third Jewish sovereignty. Some in the Jewish community said, no, we don't need that. It could be a Jewish national home. It could be a Jewish cultural home. We don't need the political sovereignty. Others said, no, we need the political sovereignty. Look at what's happening to Jews around the world, especially in Europe and in Arab countries. And so we need our own, state to protect ourselves. So that's on the political side. The Messiah factor came in as well because some people argued it'd be nice to have a Jewish state, but that's not up to us. That comes in the time of the Messiah, whenever that will be. And there's a Jewish tradition that we don't try to calculate the coming of the Messiah. That's not up to us. It's beyond our level, beyond our pay grade, so to speak. And but there's a future hope, hope for the future redemption, and then the political state will happen at that time, and it's not up to us to create it. Other people said, well, no, it is up to us to create it because we need it. And people in the middle might have said, well, it's not up to us to create it, but we think, in the end, we can help it along.
Help it
And
along, meaning by setting it up, helping to usher in the coming of the Messiah.
right, the idea is that, yes, eventually Messiah coming, the Messianic age, that's very nice. But in the meantime, it'd be nice to have a Jewish state. So, so they would work, and sometimes it's called because we don't claim that the total redemption has come. Obviously, the story's not over, but it's so those who are sympathetic to a Jewish state, if the Messiah has not yet come, would say this is the beginning of the redemption. or the beginning of the flowering of redemption, kind of hedging, the initial stages. But it's not up to us to know how long that's going to take. And, we just literally, there's a rabbinic notion of we don't calculate the end of days.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we take it one day at a time. Judaism in general focuses on this world, and our obligations in this world. And so yet we still feel the need to, have a Jewish state and certainly support it today.
Yeah. You had told me that it's the majority of Jews who would believe that we should have a Jewish state, and it's a minority who would say, no, we're taking matters into our own hands and we should wait for the Messiah. Is that
Right,
correct?
I think so. I think the early debates maybe it was open debate, and should we do this? Should we not do this? The Zionist congresses started in 1897, and the question is whether it was a pretty major effort to think about even having a Jewish state. And So people argued, well, should we do this? Should we not do this? But as it grew, and as anti-Semitism grew, um, before the Nazis even, the Russian pogroms,
You're right.
uh, under the Tsar, various attacks in Europe, certainly history of attacks throughout the centuries. But even again, the 1900s, it got worse and worse, and certainly under the Nazis, it was pretty clear that we had to do something. Um, it's an interesting example was pointed out recently. We just had Israel Independence Day this week, and by design, the day before Israel Independence Day is Israel Memorial Day,
Mm,
to remember those soldiers who fell, and now also they take into account victims of terrorism. So Israel goes from Memorial Day to Independence Day one day after the other. It'd be like having July 3rd as Memorial Day and July 4th as Independence Day.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and to make that mood switch. A week before Israel Memorial Day is Holocaust Memorial Day. And they're like a week apart, and that's by design too. So
Right.
what was pointed out this week, which I think is quite fascinating, really, is that these two Memorial Days, a week apart every year, um, Holocaust Memorial Day reminds us of what happens when there's not a Jewish state and a Jewish defense set up, and Israel Memorial Day reminds us what happens when there is a Jewish state.
Huh.
And so there's tragedies in both cases to be mourned and the losses to be remembered, but they're kind of like polar opposites. Because one of the things that happened during the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, was there was no Jewish state to, intervene. And not that they could have taken on the Nazis by themselves, but there were Jews living in Palestine who wanted to fight the Nazis and work with the British, and as we spoke about last time, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but there was no organized state. So now Israel is not automatically responsible for Jews all over the world, but there is a feeling of connection between Israel and the Jews of the diaspora, Jews all over the world. So that
Gotcha.
will be,
But you would say that even prior to the coming of the Messiah, that having a Jewish state, you called it something. Yeah.
well, the beginning of the flowering of redemption,
Yes. Yes. Beginning of the flower
uh,
of redemption.
which is, the beginning of a process, but it's not up to us to know whether that's 10
How
years
long
or
that is.
10,000 years,
Right.
we don't know.
And
But we,
I'm sorry, your
no, I was going
belief.
to say, we value this existence of the state of Israel,
Right.
and except for a small fringe, a very small fringe.
But not
Uh,
having a state, and I guess I'm asking maybe you personally, not having a state, if there was ever a time, where that happened, that would not prohibit in your belief system, that would not stop the Messiah from coming.
I would hope not. Again, it's not up to me to decide.
Right,
But
right. Yeah, I'm just wondering. I
yeah,
guess I know there's a diversity of beliefs when it comes to
yeah.
Messiah
No, I mean it's something. I mean, like I said, Judaism in general focuses on this world and and our obligations in this world. At the same time, we have ideas and thoughts and reflections and teachings about the coming of the Messiah, of the future, the world to come, of the but we don't get as dogmatic about them as maybe some other groups do. And
Yeah.
we take it one day at a time, and you know, there's an, I mean, not to say Judaism as a whole doesn't think to the future, but in Israel's, it was an old joke that in Israel, um, short-term planning is what's for lunch, long-term planning is what's for dinner.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
So, you know, we think in the future, but we know that things can change, things happen. Um, and you know, we have to take care of things right now. So obviously we think about the future, the messianic redemption of the world. We have our teachings, biblical teachings that we share with the world. Um, you know, but we don't know personally. I mean, as
Yeah.
humans, we don't
Yeah.
know
And
exactly.
and I'll, again, I like I said last time, if there's anything I ask you, I got so many questions. If there's anything I ask you, like, you know what, cut that out. I don't want my personal opinion of that matter being out there. You
Well,
can always tell me. Um,
okay, I'm honored to share, but again, with my disclaimer that I'm just myself. I don't
exactly.
speak
No, I
on
know.
behalf of the Jewish community, or I don't speak on behalf of Israel. I
Right.
can only speak about my
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a rabbi in our town, that we share a town. We share an identity in a
Right,
town.
right,
Uh,
right,
New
right. We're all
Jersey.
brick residents.
Um, but the promise to Abraham, that turn you into a great nation, and through that nation all the worlds, or all the nations, all the families on earth will be blessed.
Hmm.
So your belief, guess I'm asking you personally, when the messianic age comes, when the Messiah comes, the world would be blessed in a way, like through Israel. He would rule from Israel, and all nations of the earth would recognize him as the true God. Is that correct?
Um, Again, there are different ideas about this, but the notion that you know seeing Jerusalem as the center of the world is a very old notion,
Right.
and from there's many passages in the Bible that talk about this. From out of Zion shall go forth, the Torah, the teachings come out of Zion, for the whole world. Now we have shared with the rest of the world the Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
and obviously the Christians and Muslims have gone in different directions, but that we're all kind of related, so to speak, um, both as humans and also kind of what's sometimes called the Abrahamic, faiths coming. Um, so yes, I mean, there's a sense of the whole world coming together. The whole world will worship together in Jerusalem peacefully. We hear something like that, we say that's messianic. You know,
Right. Right.
if that was to happen, if all nations came to Jerusalem and could worship together, even or parallel to each other peacefully, that would be quite messianic. And yet, again, we don't know. Judaism doesn't get, I would say, dogmatic to know exactly. It's all right. Step A, then step B, then step C, then step D. We feel that we can have faith in the future without knowing exactly how it's supposed to happen.
Right. But I guess what I'm getting at is the other faith you guys will be respectful of, tolerant of, friendly towards, but there's still a belief that one day Yahweh's Messiah is coming, and Muslims who went in one direction, Christians who went in this other direction will see that, oh, that's the one true God, and will come and worship together, in peace together. But
Yeah.
ultimately, at the moment, they're wrong. And you're not going to offend me by saying that. I just want to.
No, well, it's an interesting question. Even worshiping together doesn't mean all becoming Jewish.
Okay.
Judaism, that's a good point to bring up. Judaism does not have a mandate to make the whole world Jewish. Someone wants to convert, okay, talk to them and, and
Yeah.
teach, but there's no requirement or mandate to make the whole world Jewish.
Not a big
Judaism
emphasis on
recognizes,
proselytizing.
right, so as a result, Judaism says to the rest of the nations, we recognize that there are nations of the world that are different from us.
Yeah.
So even if they come together and worship peacefully in Jerusalem, they can still be uniquely themselves. But
Okay. Interesting.
at the same time, we should be able to get along with each other.
Right.
It seems
Sure.
like
Sure. Yeah. Do you find it, and again, you won't offend me if you say this, but does your congregation find it offensive that Muslims and Christians have a greater emphasis on proselytizing and sharing their faith with others?
I don't think we take it as offensive. We just know it's different.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
that's
so
charity.
that I mean, look, I mean, that's part of your faith. That's your mission. But now at the same time, and this is an issue in Israel too, because obviously religion plays an important role in the Holy Land.
Yeah.
There's a sense in Israel that you can be Christian and Muslim, but proselytizing itself is discouraged, and sometimes I think was made illegal. So there's a delicate balance there. How do you have, let's say, a Christian group in Israel where proselytizing is important to them, and yet Israel is saying, hey, keep to yourselves, and don't, go out on the streets and try to recruit people. And um, so, and even Jewish groups that want to reach out to others who are not religious, they're generally reaching out to other Jews who are already Jewish and wanting to make them more religiously Jewish.
Okay.
So, for
So what?
example, one Hasidic group known as Chabad or Lubavitch are very outreach oriented and want, but their first question to you on the street is, "Are you Jewish?" And if you say yes, they say, "Okay, did you light candles for Shabbat? Do you want to help put on tefillin, the phylacteries? Do you want to come and celebrate this Sukkot holiday with us in our booth, in our sukkah?"
Hmm.
And if you said, "I'm not Jewish," it's okay, thank you, have a good day.
Hmm.
You know, so that they're reaching out to Jews to become more Jewishly involved.
Gotcha.
Um, Now, there was a debate earlier in American Jewish history, and a little bit off and on. If we as Jews are proud of who we are and what we teach, why not proselytize? Why not reach out to people who are not Jewish and maybe they'd be interested? So there's a little bit of tendency, somewhat. I mean, there are, but it's not really a major trend. It's really people who come to us and say, I'd like to consider becoming Jewish. Then we sit down and talk and see where they're coming from.
What about those who would call themselves Messianic Jews who are Jewish, but believe Jesus is the Messiah? Is there a desire to bring them back and to say, hey, no, you're wrong. This is why he's not the Messiah? Is there a desire to
Yeah,
bring back your brothers and sisters?
that is a tricky question, because again, there are different religious and ethnic overlaps. There is a sense of Jewish peoplehood, no
Yeah,
matter what their points of view are.
right.
It's like a family; it's one big family, and no matter what the points of view in the family, you're still family. You're still cousins and uncles and aunts, and on the other hand, there's religious differences, and if someone is a Messianic Jew that, from our point of view, has accepted Jesus as their savior, and whatever terminology the group would use, they say, well, that's kind of like converting to Christianity in a way. I mean, you might be just like people who are not Jewish convert to Judaism. Sometimes a Jewish person converts to other religions, um, and Islam works. Their conversion works differently too, and they
Yeah.
have their ways, their methods. So it's a little bit of a tricky question. Are they considered part of the Jewish community? Are they separate from the Jewish community? We don't have an official population registry in America anyway of
Yeah, yeah,
who's in the
yeah, yeah,
Jewish
yeah.
community or who's not. So, and we recognize people have their faith paths, and that's their choice. Um, but the generally organized Jewish community tends not to be so involved. They say, well, that's more of a Christian group.
There's not like a policy that, hey, we're going to stay away from them now.
No, we just, in fact, my Philadelphia congregation, when I was there, in the same neighborhood, there was a kind of a Messianic Jewish congregation, and we just didn't have much to do with each other.
Yeah,
Um,
gotcha.
it's we're all Americans and we're all citizens, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But we didn't really do joint activities or anything like that.
Were they
Um,
trying to proselytize to you guys?
No, not that we felt. I mean, it was their it was their base in Philadelphia. It happened to be in our neighborhood, but
Yeah,
a few blocks away. But we didn't have any antagonism either. Just now, if there was an interfaith clergy group, like we have the Brick, Clergy
yeah,
Association, minister, if it's an interfaith group, then anybody, I guess, could be, part of that group. Um,
sure,
but
right,
as a Jewish community, we generally don't include, churches, so that they would be, so it might be a Messianic Jewish congregation, but to us, it would seem like a church,
right. No, and that makes sense. That
which
that
they're entitled to be the way they want to be.
right. But
I mean,
in your mind, they would have left. They're still a part of the ethnic Jewish family, but they have left the religious faith in your mind.
right.
Yeah,
And the Jewish peoplehood part is really an individual. Each person is considered, technically Jewish or not Jewish, and
yeah,
by Jewish identity. Um, so the congregation as a whole, I mean, like every congregation is made up of a diverse group of people. It might be a Messianic Jewish congregation, but they may have non-Jews who go there too.
mm.
Um, so that far, as far as we know, we don't know because we don't, check on each other.
What about the temple? Is there what's your belief about the temple being rebuilt, the third temple? Is there a is
Well, that's
that
a good, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that's a good example of what we spoke about. That is theoretically, in the part of the Messianic age, might be the rebuilding of a third temple.
But
Um,
not for now.
but we don't do that. But that's not up to us to do right now.
Okay. Okay.
And we don't even know what that would mean. And does that mean bring back with animal sacrifices? It seems to be a little awkward to think about that. And yet our prayers talk about that. The coming of the Messiah, the rebuilding of the temple. So many of us take it as kind of more metaphoric. Um, it's an image of a redeemed world. Um, if I woke up tomorrow and the temple was already built miraculously, I go, whoa, you know. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine that happening. But that doesn't mean that it's something in the future. So uh, whether it's a literal rebuilding, some people do take it as a literal rebuilding. Um, there are uh, again somewhat fringe groups, but within the Jewish community who want to rebuild the third temple, want to reinstitute sacrifices. There was apparently some people caught. I think I mentioned this last time. Was some people caught with little goats coming up to the Temple Mount area right before Passover this year,
Hmm.
and they were presumably planning to sacrifice a Passover lamb,
Wow.
on the Temple Mount.
And that
Um,
they were caught and that was obviously illegal.
yes, they were caught before they did any slaughtering. The idea of actually having on the Temple Mount animal offerings. First of all, the temple is not there. The Dome of the Rock is there. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is there. We consider the Western Wall, the outer wall, is an outer wall of the Temple Mount, of the Second Temple Mount, of the Second Temple. But we still consider a holy spot, the Temple Mount. And it's a good example of how we deal with the current situation without thinking about rebuilding. So, first of all, even if we were to think about rebuilding the third temple, who would be eligible to do that? Who would be, in the state of purity to do that? Uh, as I said before, we have so many opinions within the Jewish world. We probably couldn't even decide who would be eligible to do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and that would all be part of the Messianic age. Somehow it would all be clear, who would do that. And so again, a lot of times it's seen more metaphoric, an example of redemption, and again beyond our understanding and current level to know how anything like that would happen.
Yeah.
And yet we don't deny the possibility. But before 1948, there was one of the chief rabbis of Israel, Rav Kook, his name was. Apparently, he was a vegetarian, from what I understand. So he said, when the third temple is rebuilt, we'll have the grain offerings, not the animal offerings.
Hmm.
Well, you
Interesting.
know, it's interesting insight, point of view. I think he would be probably willing to say that's his opinion, and it's not, a
Yeah.
mandate, but it's an interesting insight. Um, so it would be, certainly in the conservative movement, which I'm a member of, which is a centrist movement, we don't envision a reinstitution of animal offerings in a temple, and yet at the same time we keep in our prayers the notion of a temple and worshiping in Jerusalem, and try to kind of internalize the passion and the fervor that would go with that,
Hmm.
even in our prayers today. Now, of course, everything in Israel, the religion and politics overlap. So the current status quo of the Temple Mount is that the Temple Mount area, the mount itself, where the Al Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are, the Mosque of Omar, um, uh, are administered by the Muslim authorities called the Waqf, usually spelled Waq or Kf, Waqf,
Hmm.
and they by treaty with Jordan answer to the Jordanian government, and yet the Western Wall, which is right there,
Hmm.
supporting the Temple Mount, is administered by the Jewish religious authorities. And there's this, the Kotel, the Western Wall, the Plaza, and there's a stairway that goes up to the Temple Mount. And so, even though it's all part of Jerusalem, its administration is shared between the Muslims on the Temple Mount itself and the Jewish uh, authorities at the Western Wall Plaza. And the Christians have holy spots in Israel too, in Jerusalem too, but this is specifically about the Temple Mount. So um, the rules are that one could visit the Temple Mount, even if you're Jewish, but you can't pray there, right? So, and
Right.
if you were to go up to the Temple Mount and start opening a prayer book, some policeman will come over to you and say, "This is not allowed here."
Wow.
Now, if you just go up and think to yourself, I guess, without moving your lips,
Wow.
I guess, now this is all part of what's called the status quo agreement to keep the peace,
Right.
because they don't want Jewish groups establishing a synagogue on the Temple Mount, under Muslim, you know, rule there. And just like I guess in the Kotel Western Wall Plaza, they don't expect to set up a mosque in the middle of the plaza.
Wow. Yeah.
So its idea is, okay, this is the agreement we have, and it's status quo. Let's not rock the boat. So now, if you went up to the Temple Mount and started saying some prayers, or how does a policeman know you're praying if you don't have a book in your hand? But it's just what they'll try to do, hopefully peacefully. Now, interesting enough, within the Jewish tradition, there's actually a split opinion of whether we should even go to the Temple Mount.
Mm.
Not from a Muslim point of view, but from a Jewish point of view. Because if this is the Holy Temple Mount, which we say it is, then who are we to tread
Mm.
where we shouldn't have been going? Because the temple, when it was built, had different precincts. The Israel, people could only go so far, and the priest could go further, and the high priest could go further.
Yeah.
And so not knowing exactly where on the Temple Mount
You might
the
be
temple
standing in the
stood,
Holy of Holies.
right? So it's not there now, but the space is there, the land is there. So there was actually, I went once when I was first time in Israel, my summer of 1971, and part of that summer, we were in Jerusalem, and there was a sign actually at the entrance saying, the chief rabbi of Israel says the Jews should not come on the Temple Mount, but they don't couldn't enforce that. They just you chose to do it or not. And I remember going up and visiting the Dome of the Rock. It is a Jewish point of view not to go up to the Temple Mount. And of course, other Jewish point of view says that's there's there's no reason not to go up to the Temple Mount. That's the Temple Mount. It's part of the heart of Jerusalem. It should be under Jewish sovereignty, not Muslim sovereignty,
Mm.
Muslim administration.
Right. Can I ask just a couple more questions?
Sure.
This has been really, really interesting. I don't want you to be afraid to offend me, but I'm curious
Okay.
about your view of Jesus. Do you like what do you believe? You believe he was a prophet, false teacher, a guy whose words were legendized over time and his story was changed over time? Um, where do you fall with the view
Yeah.
of why
Well,
Christians believe
it's
in Messiah?
yeah, it's a good question. I I think, for myself and for Judaism as a whole, I think it's fair to say that, we believe that Jesus existed. That he was Jewish. He was in Jewish, context. He saw himself as Jewish. Um, the development of Christianity in the wake of his being here, of course, is obviously went off in a different direction, but and was several generations later. So, and I'm not an expert on Christian history, but certainly the Jewish community and the Christian community, well, they were both persecuted by the Romans for a while, and they went off in different directions. So, um, um, you know, different groups have different faiths, and that's the way it is. We believe, like I said, many Jews will say that Jesus lived and existed and was, crucified by the Romans, and whether they saw him as a rebel, because remember the Jewish Messiah concept is a political rulership,
Yeah,
and the Roman Empire wasn't too happy about that
right.
because that's a measure of rebellion against the emperor. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
uh, so obviously it wasn't something to their liking. So now what the Jewish role was, that's often debated topic. And obviously the New Testament has its views. We feel that it was a Roman thing. They were the ones in charge. The Jews did not even have the legal authority under the Romans to carry out any kind of capital punishment, even if it was in the books of the Torah and in the rabbinic writings. The Romans were the ones that had the power to carry out any kind of capital punishment, any kind of death penalty,
mm,
um, and how how Christians believe what happened after Jesus' death. That's obviously I understand there's even a difference in opinion of where, in different Christian groups of where it happened. That some groups feel is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. Some groups he was buried there. Some groups feel he's buried in a tomb, which is currently right outside the city walls of Jerusalem, called the Garden Tomb. There's different Christian groups and with different ideas and traditions, and that's okay. That's
yeah,
not up to us as Jews to distinguish. One can go. I visited the Garden Tomb as well as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre when I was in Israel.
yeah.
Um,
But
you
you
can do
certainly
both.
wouldn't believe that he rose from the dead, correct?
That's yeah, that's
Yeah.
hard for us to accept.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know. Again, you're not going to offend me.
Right, right, right. But that's not up to us to judge either. But it's we it's now we have, even in our tradition, we have this notion of Elijah the prophet who you know kind of rose to heaven, and comes back and visits all the time, in different ways,
Mm,
um, but uh, there's different kind of notions of something like that. And, I mean, even today in the Passover Seder, we put out a cup for Elijah.
okay.
You know, you know. But
Okay.
from our point of view, Elijah is supposed to come back and herald the coming of the Messiah, right? So being so that the notion that Elijah will come back. So it's kind of an interesting precedent, you might say. You know.
Yes.
Uh, so there's different religious concepts that are part of our organic tradition, and exactly again what's going to happen we don't get dogmatic about. We don't say it's exactly this, this, and this, but we have different notions and different ideas. There's also the idea that Elijah visits, in various guises, in different kinds of ways. Um, it's, but it's maybe more of a conceptual, again, metaphorical.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. Gotcha.
I mean, if someone came up to us and said, "I'm Elijah the prophet," I'd say, "Really?" I mean, how do we know? We have no way of judging, you know. So,
But you'd be
but
skeptical.
yeah, I mean, even the rabbis a couple thousand years ago felt that um, they pretty much said the age of classical prophecy had kind of come to an end. Now, who are they to say that? God wanted to appoint a prophet, but they basically were saying we don't expect an Isaiah or a Jeremiah kind of person to come and say,
Right.
"I'm the new prophet, and here's the message of the Lord,"
Right.
um, because we just kind of don't expect that to happen. It's not up to us to make it happen or not have it happen, but you
Yeah.
know, things the attitudes had changed, and so we feel that, the message of the Lord comes in different kinds of ways, but there was a period of time that prophets came and spoke.
Out of that, the Isaiah, the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, who do you believe that is referring to? Like Christians believe that's referring to Jesus. I'm sure you know that.
Right.
Who do you say that's referring to?
Well, in honesty, I have to look at it again, but I know that one classic interpretation is that it's referring to the Jewish people, the
The Jewish
whole,
people.
and or any one of us could be seen as that kind of suffering person. I'd have to restudy it
Gotcha.
myself,
Gotcha.
but yeah, I mean, we know that Christians point to many passages
Yeah.
of our Hebrew Bible
Yeah.
as a indication of the coming of the Messiah, and the Christians, as have the right to do that. Um, we we take the point of view that it can have multiple interpretations
Okay.
as opposed to one definitive interpretation, and that's a big difference, I think, between Jews and maybe Christian groups, at least some Christian groups. Um, that is the difference between if the Bible is seen as the Word of God, and
Mhm.
of course the Bible is very diverse, and there's all kinds of books of the Bible, but in that notion of the divine message for us, then some people say, well, it has to have a specific message. The Jewish point of view is, well, if it is a divine message to us, it can have multiple interpretations because God is infinite. We're the finite ones,
Hmm.
and therefore, you want to take it as a Christian interpretation. That's up to you,
Gotcha.
But it's not necessarily the only interpretation. And in the Jewish point of view, in general, when it comes to biblical interpretation, we accept, even within Jewish discussions, multiple interpretations. And you say, okay, that first one interpretation is interesting. The second one's interesting. The third one's interesting. And the fourth one's all the above,
Hmm.
so that different interpretations can coexist and, with each other. And that's okay, and that's we could get into that in a whole nother discussion, but we make distinctions between what we think is the plain meaning of the text, the words themselves and what meant maybe in ancient times, and the homiletical meaning,
Hmm.
which can go into a lot of different directions,
Right. Right.
and they can all exist. So the Torah has been compared to a jewel. You turn the jewel and you see different facets, different angles, different
Yeah.
images,
Yeah.
or a rock that you hit and splits into 70 pieces, and each piece is part of the original rock, or the 70 faces of the Torah, sometimes called. Um, so that different interpretations can coexist with each other,
Yeah.
and I can agree with the other interpretations or disagree with the other interpretations, or accept some of them and not all of them. So that's a general view of Jewish interpretation of biblical text
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Okay.
is important to me.
That's helpful. That's I know we covered a lot
Yeah. Okay.
over these two things. I know I asked you a lot, but I really appreciate you sharing everything from your personal belief system to your knowledge of the history of Israel, the politics. Man, it's been really helpful. I'm gonna
Well,
share
thank you for asking.
after I put this out to our church, these two, I'll see, like, some folks might have questions. Some folks might be like, well, you know, what about this or that? I might ask you for a third. Um,
Sure,
I'll
sure.
wait to release these and just kind of see.
Okay.
But
See what.
it's good to expose this, expose our people to this. So again, Rabbi Rubin, I really appreciate you taking all the time.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you and your church for your interest and support. And I'll be looking forward to sharing again.
All right, Rabbi Rubin, thank you so much, and God bless you.
You're welcome. You too. You too.
Okay.
Shalom.